Welcome back to the show, everybody. On today's episode, we have Dr. Mitch Abrams. He is a sport and forensic psychologist. He's an author. He's an expert in sexual and domestic violence in sport, and he's the chief psychologist of the University Correctional Healthcare Rutgers. And this episode is brought to you by All Black Everything Performance Energy Drink, the official energy drink of the Athletic Fortitude podcast, available in Walmart, Meijer, and select GNC franchise locations. Warning, on today's episode, we do contain discussions of sexual abuse. Listener discretion is advised. If you need support, please reach out to a trusted friend or contact our helpline in your area. And on today's episode, Dr. Mitch Abrams.
So I had a tweet the one day, and I'm not calling you an asshole, but I was like, some of my best friends are assholes, not in the sense that they're bad people, but they are authentically themselves all the time. And I know 100% of the time I'm getting the real.
Yeah, I mean, but I used to. You say you apologize. I'm not calling you an asshole, but you're an asshole, and that's okay. Because that's perfect. Because I used to call my mother a bitch, and it was absolutely a compliment. It was, it was in. I was like, wow, you're a bitch. Like, you say what you feel. You're unapologetic, and yeah. So I get it. I get it.
Why has a word like that then been taken it? Particularly, you look at professional athletes, and they are so offended by that word.
Bitch or asshole?
Bitch.
Well, I think that there's a difference, right? So I think the reason why you're talking about male athletes, because bitch is thought of as this is a female. So you're immediately challenging their masculinity. But if you do it subtly, even if you say, "Hey, why are you bitching about this?" There's a subtle message of, "Why are you acting like a woman?"
Yeah.
And men are so insecure that they.
Well, even think about though, Pat McAfee called Caitlin Clark a bad bitch, and there was a bunch of backlash to him too, but he clearly meant it or he might call her a white bitch. Regardless, he meant it as a compliment, and it got thrown at him that it was derogatory and negative. But even if you mean it in a compliment, where's the disconnect?
Well, I mean, look, perfect communication is when people receive it exactly the way you intend it. There's no such thing as a perfect communicator. But when you do things in the public arena, you when you cast it out, anybody who hears it thinks that they have a right then to interpret it and opine on it. And okay, you're allowed to interpret it whatever way you want, but I knew what I meant by it. The person who received it knew what I meant by it. So if you just want to waste some airspace bitching about me, knock yourself out. By the way, just real quick, I don't know. My video is clear on my side. Yours is a little grainy. Is that normal?
Yeah, so don't worry about it. And we're good. Don't worry about it. And if you freeze, just keep talking. I can hear you.
Perfect. Okay. So so don't be a bitch.
Oh, that's awesome. Now I know we want to go dark, where people don't want to talk about it. They want to pretend it's not there. The Sandusky's of the world, the Larry Nassars of the world. How do we get to that point? What part of our human nature gets us to that point?
Well, which part of the question, Colin? What gets us to the point that we would do that, or what gets us to the point that we could talk about it?
To the point. Well, let's do both. Whichever one you want to hit first.
Well, the reason why people have difficulty getting, not the reason why. Well, yeah, we could talk about that. The difficulty that people have getting to talk about it is exactly what allows it to happen. We could get into sexual deviance and in sports and all. We could certainly do that. We'll do that in a few minutes. But I think that There are few things that catch the headlines more than deviance in sport, but people don't want to talk about the why and the how and what you do about it. In fact, I don't think anything gets headlines more than, that type of drama, with the exception of either scandal on the court or stats or highlight films. You got postered on ESPN. But you could open up ESPN any day and guarantee on the side where you're looking at at your list of news, there's always going to be one thing in there that's scandalous. And it's not because athletes are more likely to be involved in bad stuff. That's the easy thing. That's the trope that some people have tried to portray, and it's frankly it's bullshit. We could talk about the evidence for that, but in a moment. But we have always been attracted to the worst that man has to offer. The same way, and women too, by the way, just because men tend to engage in deviant behavior more than women do, statistically, doesn't mean that women don't do horrible things too. But I think as a society, to quote the movie Jaws, you want to ignore this particular problem until it swims up and bites you on the ass. It's not one fucked up family in Wisconsin where all of the abuse is happening. No offense to anybody from Wisconsin. It happens everywhere. It's all around us. I was doing a presentation to coaches, high school coaches, a couple of years ago, and I had the misfortune of following their hazing presentation. And I said to the coaches after I listened to the presentation, I said, look, I don't want to rain on anyone's parade, but everything that guy just said is complete bullshit. Okay? Because he started with, well, of course, this isn't a problem here. There's no better way to advertise that the problem could be here than to say there's no problem here, right? And there's so many reasons why hazing makes no sense. I'd love to talk about hazing. I want to talk about sexual deviance, all of these things, and why it's kind of crazy that they exist. But the biggest issue is this blatant denial that we have that these things happen. And by the way, people that are grooming the children count on that. They don't just groom the child, they groom the system. And so they take shots and they see if they get away with it. If they get away with it, then they'll push a little further. And they'll push a little further, a little further. And next thing you know, the priest in town that everyone thinks is the most holy, amazing person in the community is sexually abusing children. Oh my God, I can't imagine it. Yeah, it happens. And so I think even before we talk about the deviance that people engage in, we have to talk about the deviance in our society. And our society, and by the way, I take a shot at my own gang because sports psychology has done an absolutely horrible job of addressing deviance in sport. And I think there's lots of different reasons why it's complicated. I also have my own biases because it's an area of expertise of mine. So I'm like, yeah, let's roll up our sleeves and talk about it. But I assure you, this problem is not going to go away by us not talking about it. And it's frustrating to me at times. That's why I love talking to you and anybody that listen about these types of things, because somewhere along the line in the last, 25 years, I became the old guy. And I'm tired of yelling into the darkness like, what the fuck? How am I the only person who sees this? And I know my style's not for everyone. And so I kind of get to the position of, look, this is a problem. If you don't want to hear my voice, let it be someone else's voice. But we have to talk about this because the greatest risk for athletes to be victims of deviance, or for that matter, the greatest risk for athletes to be at risk for anything comes from the belief that they're not. The reason why athletes, and we've talked about this in the past, you and I, the reason why athletes are at great risk for mental health issues is because everyone thinks that because they're physically healthy, they're psychologically healthy. And it's a non sequitur. It's not always true. Is there something to be said for if you're an elite athlete, chances are you have a lot of your shit together? Yeah. But because you could jump you have a 45-inch vertical, doesn't mean you haven't thought about ending your life. Um, and so, if we don't normalize the human condition, even if athletes might be superhuman in some characteristics, they're susceptible to problems. They're susceptible to trauma. They're susceptible to how their early life is going to impact their future life. They're susceptible to being abused, and we know a very high percentage of people that are sexually deviant were sexually abused as children. And so we we ignore this problem, and it has not gone away. I've been doing work in the sexual violence prevention sphere in sports my whole career, and I feel like a failure because the truth is this problem has not shrunk one fucking iota. Now, there has been increase in awareness, which is good, but there's no evidence at all that this happens less than it used to. Whether we're talking about sexual abuse of child athletes or even adolescent athletes, or we're talking about actual rape, there's no evidence that these problems are going away. And a lot of that has to do with our society and how we turn the other cheek and allow things to happen that should absolutely never happen.
So why do we turn our cheek when, in particular, we are the loudest when that scandal is revealed and it happens? Everyone loves FM and everyone's covering it. Everyone's shouting from the rooftops of what should have been done, but there was nothing done beforehand to prevent it. So why is there such a disconnect?
Well, I think for one thing, if you're yelling about it now, you can act like you were yelling about it all along. Or maybe our voyeuristic instincts override our moral instincts. Like, why am I paying so much attention to this? Because it's news. But when it was going on, and there's reasons to believe that you should have known, you didn't do anything. I mean, look, we know the Larry Nassar scandal. We know there were sports psychologists that were working with those athletes. None of them knew. None. I mean, Bella Caroli just died, right? In the gymnastics world, there is a major upheaval right now. It is really bimodal. There are some people that are talking about how revered he was and how he moved the needle and on the sport, and there's a lot of people know that he served athletes up to Larry Nassar like Grubhub, and there's a lot of ugly. And so, we don't really have a space that allows for people talking about these things openly. And I think that the other thing is that people, males, perpetrators, will often run to the false report narrative as a way to say, oh, that person just made it up. Now, if you take a look at I don't know, a hypothetically multi-million-dollar NBA player who gets accused of sexual assault, you could certainly argue that there's secondary gain. That when there's fame and money in the kitty, there might be an increase in risk of false reports. But we know that statistically, false reports only exist based off of FBI statistics. Sexual assault false reports occur about 2 to 5% of the time, no more or less than any other type of crime. So if we know that that's the case, are we willing to put 5 people in jail for every 100 that are accused? No, because it's not that simple anyway. And we also know that it is far, far, far more likely that someone is not going to tell anyone, let alone report to the police, let alone go through a rape kit, let alone go through a prosecutor's interrogation. So when we hear this false report narrative, we're often chasing shadows, and the shadows are about shifting responsibility. I'm a big believer in the criminal justice system, even though the criminal justice system has a lot of flaws in it. We are in America. You are innocent until proven guilty. I believe if you're convicted and you serve your crime, you have an opportunity to re-enter society and retake your post. It's like a lot of people used to talk about Michael Vick with such disdain, like, oh my God. And listen, I could understand killing a person. I can't understand killing a dog. Like anybody who's been around a dog goes, what? Like dogs are better able to appreciate unconditional love than humans are capable of. So the heinousness of what Michael Vick was involved with That part's not up for debate. But the man served his time. We have so many people that either never get caught, never serve their time. It was wrong. He served his debt to society, which is more than what a lot of people do. Fucking move on. And I think that one of the things that leads people to believe that athletes are exempt or they get a different set of rules, the mistake that people make is professional athletes, or at least it used to be professional athletes. Now it's college athletes as well, thanks to NIL, right? NIL just took, I was telling someone the other day and they go, oh man, that's brilliant. I never thought about it. Legalized gambling, right? Took the underground gambling that everybody knew about it and put a twist on it so that it's legal and now it's okay. Well, NIL is just the legalization of the booster system that was there before. Right? So it's not new. It's just repackaged. But now you have to consider NIL athletes similar to professional athletes. And this is what I mean. You need to consider both of those groups the same as celebrities. That group of people do not get off because they're less likely to be falsely accused. I mean, more likely to be falsely accused. Those people get off because they can afford better attorneys. And unfortunately, in our system, if you have a public defender, and I work with a lot of public defenders, so I'm not taking a shot at them, but they are overworked. They have huge caseloads, and they don't have the resources. Versus you have a private, high-paid boutique attorney. That's going to have a great impact on whether or not you're convicted and what your sentencing is. I mean, shit, when was the last time a pro athlete got sentenced during their season? Somehow there's always we're going to suspend this hearing until, they recover from their hamstring or, as soon as the last bowl game is played. So there's a lot of shit that's all wrapped up in here. And I hope that we can sort some of it out because there's so much great that comes from sports that if we don't talk about the deviance, if we don't talk about how we extricate it, then but shit, there's still people who think competition is bad, right? It's like there's so much great stuff, but there are also people that are willing to throw sports under the bus whenever they get a chance. You're not going to allow sports to survive by ignoring the blemishes. Instead, you put a light on the blemishes. You try to understand what's going on. You don't stop sex offending by acting like it doesn't happen. You shine a light on it and you go, I can't, my job is not to excuse what they did. But if I can explain why they did what they did, I can assess if we could provide treatment and we could do something about it. Because this is the ugly truth that no one wants to talk about. If I have an athlete playing for Florida State University, for argument's sake, and that person gets has a Title IX violation case coming, and they're accused of sexual assault, right? The school only has a couple of options. The school can kick him to the curb, right? And then he'll go to Florida and kick your ass in a bowl game, right? You can let the system play out and see how it goes. Or imagine this. You assess him to determine what he needs. Assess his likelihood of reoffending. And if he is amenable to treatment, provide him treatment. Because when you kick him out, you know what's going to happen? Not only is he going to kick your ass when he plays you in the bowl game, there's going to be more victims. So in the college sports world, and even in the pro sports world, people will selectively dissociate themselves from people who've done bad shit. But if you really care about the victims, you have to identify the perpetrators and get them treatment or incarcerate them. Otherwise, there's going to be more victims. So as you can see, as soon as you pick up the onion, there's layers of stuff.
There's so much I want to unpack. And I always hate when I say that, but there's so much I want to unpack. I want to start here. Because I think for people like myself who may not have a full understanding, and I know a lot of athletes like myself, it's when we're talking about the sexual assault nature, it appears that there's a lot of gray area too. Because I think the common thing you hear, especially from college athletes, is wake up with regret, right? You're at a frat party, whatever party, everyone's boozing, everybody's drinking, and then you wake up with regret. And it's really word versus word, right? It's someone's
yeah, we did have sexual relations, but it was consented. That's like,
Right.
how do you consent with alcohol and whatever? And it's, where does that line get drawn? Because I think when we hear rape, we have a visual picture of someone against their will, sexual
Right.
assault, someone against their will. And that's not necessarily the case. That's not always what rape or sex is.
Absolutely. I'm glad you're bringing that up, Colin, because that, first off, most sexual assault occurs from people that we know, right? And when you know that person, you're even less likely to report it because you might have your own feelings that you contributed to this problem. The answer actually is fairly simple. It starts with education. When we talk about sexual assault prevention, the most common thing that people are doing on college campuses is something called bystander intervention. This is the idea that if something bad is happening, we're going to train people to stand up and prevent this from happening. This is just fucking bananas in so many different ways. Because if you know anything about sports teams, there is no way a freshman D back is going to be telling the captain of the defense, I think what you're doing is wrong. You need to stop that. There's a stratification of power. But besides that, what do you think? That like a guy is raping a girl right in the middle of the frat house? No. They're going to separate her from the herd. They're going to see if she's drinking. And this is when they're hunting. This is when they're deliberately trying to do it, right? So if you want to, so bystander intervention only works if you have somebody who is being aggressive and there's an opportunity for other people to stand up, and those people will do so. Research has showed it's really, really, really hard for even adults to stand up when they see something wrong happening. So we're thinking college kids are going to do that, high school kids are going to do that? Unlikely. So if you're going to want to talk about prevention, it has to be comprehensive. And one of the things that you have to talk about is drugs and alcohol and the legalities of consent. Now, I can tell you, Colin, that there have been times that I've gone to present, and there have been athletic directors and other dignitaries, if you will, who have asked me not to present on drugs and alcohol. Why do you think that is?
Liability.
Blaming the victim. If I talk about drugs and alcohol, I must be saying, well, it's not the perpetrator's fault, it's the drug and alcohol. And I said, all right, listen, we know that a certain amount of sexual assaults, alcohol's involved, right? I don't think it's a good idea for anybody, male or female, to drink to the point of unconsciousness. You're vulnerable to everything. So if I'm skipping down the streets of Newark, la 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 la, and I have hundreds out, would everybody agree that that's bad judgment?
Yes.
Right. That doesn't mean I deserve to be robbed, but it's bad judgment. If anyone, male or female, drinks to the point that they are unconscious, they're vulnerable. It's bad judgment. We should encourage people to use better judgment when they're using drugs and alcohol. Okay? So a lot of times people don't want to have the conversation because it's like we're shifting responsibility. The issue is very simple. If someone commits a sexual assault, the perpetrator is the person that is responsible, not the victim. However, it doesn't mean that we can't encourage better judgment. And the reason why this all gets confusing is that most guys don't know the legalities of consent. And we've never talked to guys about it. So when you do talk to them, they go, what? Yeah. There's a whole lot of shit in the law that you don't know. And if someone wanted to argue and say, hey, you know what, Mitch, I think that the laws have swung too far and it is too easy to make allegations of rape. I would say I understand why you feel that way. But I also understand that the reason why the rape laws have shifted the way they have, the pendulum is swung, is because there have been thousands and thousands of victims over the course of the years that the criminal justice system failed them. It wasn't that long ago that it was legally impossible to rape your wife in a couple of states in the South. Okay? So the laws shifted, and maybe they shifted too far, but the reason why they shifted too far was because it was next to impossible to get a prosecution for rape. Okay? So when we consider consent, and by the way, there are state to state differences. Like, for example, in New Jersey, um, the perpetrator of an aggravated sexual assault is the person that penetrated the other person. Now, obviously, sexual contact could be other things besides inserting, right? But if there is insertion, the person that is doing the inserting is considered the potential perpetrator, and the victim, the recipient of the insertion, is the one who has to give consent. So if you have a guy and a girl that are equally drunk, and the girl is the person who's getting penetrated, she's the one who has to give consent. Okay? And guys will say, well, that's not fair. I say, well, if you follow the law in the other direction, if she's inserting something into you, you're the one who has to give consent, right? But the question boils down to is, what are the circumstances that are required in order to be able to give consent? All right, well, you cannot be so intoxicated that you can't make good decisions. How much alcohol is that? I don't know. Depends on the person, depends on the night, depends on how much you ate beforehand, depends on what's the proof of the alcohol, depends on whether or not someone decided to put a little Everclear in the punch, right? So you can't be so intoxicated. I mean, certainly if you're intoxicated to the point that you can't stand up or you can't talk, that's a dead giveaway, right? Drugs can do the same thing for sure. You'll sometimes hear guys go, oh, she's so crazy. If she's crazy and she's drunk, probably not the best person you want to be having sex with. Not to mention the fact that there's this whole culture especially in college life, that your value as a man is going to be assessed by the number of women you sleep with instead of the quality of the relationships that you have, right? So there's issues of toxic masculinity and what we don't do to teach boys how to become men, so that these boys believe that in order to be popular and valuable, they have to have sex with as many people as possible. So if you are not 100% sure that the person can give consent, then the answer is no. Now, I'll give you something else that I'm going to watch your eyebrows like come out from underneath your hat and then pop up like this. There's something called forcible compulsion, which is a component of the sexual assault statute in certain states. Like New York has it, New Jersey doesn't have the same thing. But in forcible compulsion, it means if the person complied with sex because they were afraid that if they didn't, they would be harmed, whether the threat is overt or covert, that's a sexual assault. So you have a basketball player who's 6'6", 200 pounds, and you have a girl who's 4'11", 105 pounds, and they have sexual relations, and the next day she says, I only did that because I was afraid that if I did it, he would hurt me. What's his defense? The only thing he could say is, I didn't threaten her. I thought we were all on board. I said, do you want to do this? She said, yes. We were both drinking. Neither one of us seemed to be intoxicated. I thought everything was good. So the forcible compulsion component, when I explain that to men, they're like, what? And are there some people that have sex and the next day they regret it? Yes. Now add to that for a second, athletes that are identified as different and better from the time that they're very young, and they start getting a different set of rules, right? So, you're the fastest kid in the class. Next thing you know, you're starting to play ball and you're batting 600 on a baseball team, and people don't care if your homework doesn't get in. Somehow you always get good grades. And then you start getting more confident. So dads start pushing their daughters towards you, and everybody starts to give you a different set of rules. And you start to drink the Kool-Aid. And if everyone thinks I'm the best, then the girls think I'm the best, then they would feel honored to be with me. Next thing you know, you have an athlete who thinks everybody wants to be with me. The idea of them saying no is just playing hard to get. And I'll take what I want. Now, don't misunderstand me. It's still on the athlete. But let's not ignore the societal things that we do that give athletes the idea that they have a different set of rules. And we shouldn't do that any more than we should put coaches on pedestals and give them a different set of rules.
How do you qualify verbal and nonverbal cues of acceptance?
Ultimately, it's all in the eyes of the recipient. That's why what I tell guys is if you're not 100% sure the answer is yes, the answer is no. Don't leave it to chance. And it's difficult because, I mean, it's not just a trope that women change their minds. You know why? Because humans change their minds. You know, the idea I'm okay with kissing you. I'm okay with you with me letting you put your hands up my shirt. I'm not okay with you putting your hands down my pants. Because I say yes to this doesn't mean I can't say no to that. Um, if we're going to talk bluntly about this, you'll hear guys sometimes say, well, she led me on, or she was fondling me, and, I was starting to get blue balls, as if blue balls is a fatal disease, right? I couldn't stop the train. Yeah, if her father was walking up the stairs, you could, right? So I think that there are times that there are interpretation issues, that you're right, that sometimes the guy, and by the way, I apologize, I should have said this at the beginning. Sexual assault issues exist in homosexual populations the same way as they exist in heterosexual populations. I'm only using male and female just because they're statistically more common, but these things can play out with every version of your preferences. So there's definitely the room for misinterpretation of cues. But if a girl says no, it means no. If you're not 100% sure that she wants to, I mean, look, we've had times where I've been involved in cases where not only did a girl say yes, she was the aggressor. She took off her own clothes, took off his clothes. They engaged in sex, and the next day she said that she didn't want to do it. Right? Those cases are complicated. I think that the most important thing is to remember what you just said, that there is room for misinterpretation. And don't let that be an opportunity for you to make the wrong decision, because you could be doing something you think is completely cool, completely kosher. Two people are on the same page, and you could forget, you can mess up your whole life. I mean, especially these days with social media. I mean, it's good and bad. When I was a kid, if I was doing deviant stuff, and I'm not talking about sexually deviant stuff, I'm talking about if you stole a pack of gum, it wasn't on Twitter the next day of look at what this jerk did. So, I mean, you have cases where guys are sexually assaulting girls while they're drunk and they're videotaping it. It's like you're doing something horrible, and you're so full of yourself that you need to brag about it and guarantee your incarceration. I mean, it's pretty crazy.
Make it sound like an old guy here, but I loathe traditional culture right now. I'm very anti-hookup culture. I'm anti-binge drinking. And I understand everyone has to meet their significant other in some capacity, some way, somehow. But that's different than people proactively being like, I'm going to get this tonight and go to it, which is unbelievably common on both sides of the spectrum. Like you said, men and women operate.
Well, first off, I am way older than you, and the binge drinking culture was there before me. So now let's not act like this is a new development.
Right. Yeah. To be fair, yeah.
But there is greater sexual freedom now. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, you could make the argument that the only time that there was more sexual freedom was in the '60s than there is now.
Woodstock.
Yeah, I mean, there is absolutely the availability of casual sex. And it's not a big deal. Now, and it's interesting because in the old days, girls were socialized that their vaginas were connected to their hearts. And that was not always a good thing for them either, because you could have a very good, healthy sex life without being in love with someone, right? But the other side of it is that we've so watered it down that sex is almost as trivial and non-consequential as, I don't know, getting your nails done or picking up a newspaper. Well, you used to pick up newspapers. I mean, going online and just seeing what's on social media. So there's absolutely the normalization of sexual availability, and you put that's why college campuses are so dangerous. You have this hookup culture with the culture of binge drinking. And if you add toxic masculinity that says women are objects, go bang as many girls as you can, then you have an explosion waiting to happen. And this is the funny thing about it. Guess what, guys? Girls like having sex too. They do, just not with you because you're an asshole. And we're not teaching guys how to be men. Being a man, from my estimation, is having the characteristics that somebody wants to share themselves with you, that they want to be in your presence, that sexuality is part of one of many parts of your interrelatedness. That's great. The problem is that sexuality has become so devalued that it's kind of like a yeah and instead of something to aspire to as a relationship grows.
Now, with the Larry Nassar, Jerry Sandusky type situations, when we get to that level, and it's like you said earlier, you should know, like, there's no way you don't know what's going on. Is the silence that allows it to build up a disbelief that it's happening, or a different version of that person, and you don't believe that it's going on, or you don't want to see that torn down?
Both of those and other things as well. I think there are some people that are so worried about losing their jobs that they will not say something because they'll lose their status. I think there are some people who want to believe that this doesn't happen, even though it's happening right in their backyard. And I think that people should be ashamed of themselves. I really do. You're talking about children that don't have the capacity for consent. I mean, you had Larry Nassar telling girls that he was doing an assessment of them transvaginally. What? What? And parents were okay with him doing these examinations without them being in the room. He was entrusted, and he was entrusted because he groomed the system, and the system went along with it. You should be vigilant, because the truth is that even when you're vigilant, the really good groomers are going to try to find their way in. But it's similar to if a robber is going to rob your house and they hear a dog, guess what? They're just going to move to the next one. If they see an athlete that looks like they have a little bit of a self-esteem issue, they're a little bit of a rebel, they've already been caught lying, well, they're not going to believe her if she says something. So there's lots of things that groomers do in order to infiltrate the system. But all of the different reasons why people don't talk, I mean, we could talk about that all day. I think that this is one of the ironies of the bystander intervention approaches. The bystander intervention approaches came from the bystander effect. And the bystander effect said, it was based off the Kitty Genovese case in Kew Gardens, Queens, where a woman was raped and murdered outside of her building. Okay. And the rapist murderer came back 3 different times. And each time lights went on, right, in the apartment building. And he was able to come back. The point is the idea of the bystander effect is the more people witness it, the more there's diffusion of responsibility. The belief that someone else is going to call, so I don't have to. So you have people that either have their head in the sand, they might know, but they don't want to say anything or rock the boat. Think that someone else is going to do something about it. But at the end of the day, who's taking care of the athlete? Who's making sure that they're okay? While simultaneously there's a culture for the athletes that you have to find a way to perform at a level that human, 0.00001% of the people in the world can do these things in the first place. So they're socialized to ignore how they feel. They're trained to ignore pain. They're trained to carve things out and be laser focused. Exactly the training that makes them an elite athlete contributes to their risk of being victimized. And the people that were in charge, the adults, didn't fucking protect them.
How do we protect them?
Well, I think first off, you incarcerate and prosecute anybody who knew and didn't report it when they're mandated reporters. One of the issues, and this comes up in high school and college sports, is that there's a presumption that a coach is always a mandated reporter. That's not always true. You should not be allowed to work with kids unless you're a mandated reporter. And if you know something is going on and you don't report it, it's not the same thing as you're the perpetrator. but you're clearly part of the system that allowed it to continue. We have to increase awareness, accountability, education. You know what Safe Sport is?
I don't.
Safe Sport is an organization that was driven, in theory, to protect athletes from abuse. The problem is, not so surprisingly, there's more complaints of abuse than they have resources to even respond to. So when you make a complaint for an abuse, you might be waiting years before they even get to the investigation. They'll suspend a coach, and then the coach is suspended, and they'll pop up doing private lessons somewhere else. So Safe Sport was an organization that was developed to protect athletes, and I think it's well intended. But they don't have any experience working with perpetrators. And they don't have the resources. I mean, this is the thing. When we talk about this type of work, it's important to have advocates involved because advocates raise awareness, right? And a lot of times those advocates are survivors of their own abuse. And they'll tell stories that you will not hear a pin drop. It's like, holy shit, heavy. Like everybody in the room is crying. And I worry about those advocates because I worry about them being re-victimized every time they tell their story. And there are times that I've been involved with those people, almost always women, that have not been far enough in their treatment. And I worry about how this is going to end. This is like a train crash. You know that there's going to be an accident. You just don't know when. And often these things turn out to be problematic. But you can't just have people at the table that are raising awareness. You need to have people that have experience assessing and working with sex offenders. That's the only way you're going to really figure out what you need to do with whom. So, in my estimation, Safe Sport has been a political band-aid that's been tasked with trying to cover a gaping wound.
It seems pretty common sense to me that there would be more efforts and resources into this area, particularly in colleges, in the athletic world. What am I missing? Why aren't we doing more in this space? Tell me more.
Stop being so idealistic, my friend. This is not about morals. It's not about morals. I wish it were. If it were about morals, I would have been done 10 years ago. It's about money. Follow the dollar and you'll get everything you need. This is one of the bizarre things about, let's just talk about on college campuses for a second, right? A non-athlete is sexually assaulted by an athlete that's on scholarship, right? Now, you should know that the burden of proof for a prosecution is beyond a reasonable doubt in the criminal law, right? So you're talking 95% or more certainty versus a civil case where it's the preponderance of the evidence, 51% or better. So it's a lot easier to win a civil case than it is to win a criminal case. But that also first requires the person to be willing to go forward. So if the person goes for the civil suit, not the criminal suit, people immediately go, see, it's just a money grab. But it also might be because they know it's easier to prove the civil case than it is prosecution case. Because I can tell you there's a lot of people that are guilty that are not convictable. They're not the same thing. You could commit a crime, but the crime was committed in a way that it's going to be very hard to prosecute. So the woman, presuming this woman comes forward and says, I want to file a Title IX claim. If she wins, you're talking about millions of dollars. So you'd figure that schools would want to make sure that that doesn't happen, put prevention in place. Well, the prevention they put in place is primarily bystander intervention. So if you're at a school where the prevention is poor and it happens, then shouldn't you have a second legal case for gross negligence when you're doing something that you know doesn't work? When schools get bankrupted because of these Title IX suits, you'll see things change. And interesting to note, when Betsy DeVos was the Department of the chair of the Education Department under Trump's first campaign, she took Title IX and threw it on its side. And so a lot of investigations just grinded to a halt. But what was happening, which was interesting, was it wasn't just the victims that were suing on Title IX claims. Now the perpetrators were trying to sue the school as well, stating, you're throwing me out without due process and I have the right to an education. So now schools are scrambling like, oh shit, we're getting sued by both sides. Big institutions can absorb that. Small institutions cannot. And I'm telling you, Colin, it's only a matter of time before schools start closing because of Title IX suits, unless we just squash all this and we don't care. But the issue is that it's about money. When it costs them enough money, they'll make the changes. I would have thought it happened a long time ago, but it hasn't. There has not, I can show you statistics. There's not been a decrease of reports of sexual assaults. If anything, they've gone up. Now, you might argue that they've gone up because there's greater awareness, but there's clearly no situation that shows that there's happening less. People don't care. They don't fucking care until it's their kid. That's the problem. Doesn't happen here. Doesn't happen to my kid. It's horrible. 1 in 4 women are going to be the victim of sexual assault sometime over the course of their lives. And we're not going to believe them when they report it.
Have you ever seen the movie The Minority Report?
No. Did you see the movie The Program?
Yes. Yes, I have.
In that
I have
movie,
seen The Program.
In the movie The Program, after Latimer tried to sexually assault a girl who's the daughter of a booster, right? Supposedly because of roid rage, even though roids don't cause sexual assault. If that was the case, you'd see a whole lot more sexual assaults. It's much more complicated than that. But what did they do? They suspended him by putting him on the injury list with a hamstring injury. So you brought up Minority Report. I didn't see it. So what was the reason?
Yeah, so Minority Report, it's this movie. It's with Tom Cruise. Really good movie. Highly suggest that you see it. They use some type of whatever algorithm system to see into the future, to see people commit future crimes. And they arrest people for a future crime they haven't committed yet, but may in the future.
Oof.
The reason I bring that up is I asked, is there sign that these things are going to happen in the future that you can determine this person may need some type of therapy help?
Yes, there are, but they're not with surgical precision. And when we talk about people's freedom, you need to be absolutely sure. To give you an example. So we use sex offender risk assessment tools to assess people. Now, they weren't normed on athletes, but because there aren't, brace yourself, there's not enough athletes that commit sexual assaults to norm those instruments on that. Although there are a couple people who tried to do so, and I give them a lot of credit. But Jerry Sandusky, as an example, using the static 99, would be a low risk offender. Would I put my kids anywhere near him? Absolutely not. So the issue is, yes, there are certain characteristics that we can use to identify an increased likelihood of sexual recidivism, but they're not without error. So, for example, age of when you're released from the sex offense. Jerry Sandusky would be in his 70s. That's a minus. That's a low risk. He had no stranger victim. Low risk. He had some male victims. He's been married and lived with a lover for more than a period of time. He didn't have prior sexual offenses. So you think this guy is, oh my God, a monster. Yeah, I think he's very high risk. The tool that we would use would not see him as a high risk. Right? And so, but we know that there are certain things, like the things I was saying, male victims, stranger victims, history of criminal versatility, psychopathy. This is when people don't have a conscience. These are the psychopaths of the world. Deviant sexual arousal to either pedophiles or sexual sadists. So yes, there are factors and there are tools that we can use to assess people. And when we consider this is an area of expertise of mine that you don't see a lot of people out there. This is one of the reasons I don't know many people that do risk assessments for athletes. I think maybe 5 people in the country. And I train people on how to do this because it's at the intersection of forensic and sport psychology. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to assess if this individual has already been caught doing this, are they likely to do more? That's what we're trying to figure out. The other thing we're trying to figure out is, are they also responsive to treatment? because there are some people that are going to be high risk to reoffend, but they're not going to respond to treatment. For example, if you have someone who's assessed to be a psychopath, which is very, very rare, they're not going to respond well to treatment. They're going to be high risk to sexually reoffend and criminally reoffend. But the short answer is yes, we can assess people for future risk of offending, and we can provide treatment to decrease the likelihood of it happening in the future. That doesn't mean that we can decrease the risk to zero, though. Past behavior is a predictor of future behavior. And Anna Salter, who is one of the best researchers on and treatment providers of sex offender treatment in the world, she wrote a book called Predators that I reread every 10 years. I think it's important for anybody who works with sex offenders to read this, because what she found was many of the people who have reported that they got caught for one or two usually have dozens, if not hundreds, of victims that people don't know about. So we want to absolutely identify the people that are high risk. Now, the other thing is that people that are that high risk, you're probably looking at incarceration more than rehabilitation. And that gets scary for people to think about, because the truth is one is too many. But if you want to stop victims, you have to treat the perpetrators. Nobody wants to talk about that.
I read this study, and it's a little different here, but the characteristics, like psychological characteristics of people who are CEOs, Super Bowl champions, just elite outliers, people who are also serial killers, carry very similar psychological traits. And I'm assuming it's probably similar with sexual deviants, predators, and just normal people, where they have certain thoughts but they don't act, or they know how to act properly. So it's, how do you go so opposite path? Like, how do you pick the right path?
Are they? Well, first off, I don't equate the two, but there are some people that in both of those arenas that are both. I mean, look, if you, let's say for argument's sake, you are a general in the army, and you are particularly compassionate, and you have children, and you can't imagine sending children to war and they might die. Is that going to help you make decisions about war?
Probably not.
Right. So there are certain jobs that high empathy and high compassion are weaknesses for that job. As a CEO, you're trying to figure out how to be as effective as possible. And effective for a CEO is most often measured in dollars, not in the culture that you build. I think that a lot of people these days are talking about the idea that you could be a brilliant business person, you could be even richer if you develop a culture where people want to work for you. And I believe that that's true for many things, but not all things. You know, there was a book written by Robert Hare called Snakes in Suits, which was basically about psychopaths that live amongst us. And when I say a psychopath, I should clarify what I mean by that, because a lot of times people use the word psychopath like they know what they're talking about, right? A psychopath is someone who basically does not have a conscience. They don't have the same set of rules that society does. In fact, one of the things that we talk about with psychopaths is they have a malignant narcissism to them. They believe the world is there for them, and they will do whatever they want to or need to in order to get what they want. And people are not people. People are just there to get their needs met. So, for example, if a psychopath is raping someone, they don't see them as a human. They just see as someone to get sex from. So they just cut it off. It's compartmentalized. There's some research that shows that psychopaths are neurologically understimulated. Like you know how you talk about athletes have baseline good muscle tone? There's some research that shows that psychopaths have low neurological tone at baseline. And what this leads to is them being very easily bored and engaging in risk-taking behavior in order to feel alive and stimulated. So Well, these are also the same people that can cut another human up and not have any whim about it. They could shoot a dog, a puppy. It's not, they don't experience connectedness the same way. I mean, look, one of my buddies that I work with in the prison system, Harold Goldstein, I often joke that he knows more about psychopaths inside prison, and I know more about psychopaths outside prison because of some of the circles that I found myself in over the years. And I find that besides the fact that psychopathy is not by modal, meaning it's not yes or no, there are like there's this idea of the wise guy in the mob doesn't have the capacity for connection. But I've seen those guys with their daughters, for argument's sake, right? And they dote on that kid. And it's not just because they're the genetic continuation of them. They love that child, which you go, how could this person that can engage in such cold-blooded things have this connectedness? And I think the reason is because of their ability to compartmentalize. And when they compartmentalize, when I'm in this phase, I do this and I have a different set of rules. And when I do this, I have a different set of rules. It's one of the reasons why some of those guys, and by the way, you'll hear professional athletes say this the same way as the wise guys used to. Friday nights are for my mistress, Saturday nights are for my wives. I'll do things with my girlfriend that I would never do with my wife. Compartmentalization, right? So we have this idea that everyone's born with the same moral compass. It's not true. People develop their moral compasses in lots of different ways. I think that this is one of the things that we hold dear as a hallmark of organized society. I think religion does a good job to remind us of what our ideals are. Although you show me any religion, and I'll show you hypocrites who violate the basic tenets that the religion is based off of, because humans are human and fallible as at the core. But yeah, we have people that are wired differently, and those people that are wired differently can do things that are so self-centered and so cruel and hurtful and insensitive. And the truth is, I mean, look, let's think about high level athletics, right? If you're going to perform at the highest level, you have to have the ability to ignore certain emotions. It's just, there's no way around it. Like, you deal with a gymnast who's up in the air doing all this shit. Yeah, I remember I was working with a gymnast who broke her neck falling off. It sounds very dramatic. She was not paralyzed. Well, it was dramatic. You break your neck, it's never nothing. But she wasn't paralyzed by it. She had a broken vertebrae, and she comes in. And this was the first gymnast I worked with that came to me and said, "Doc, I'm afraid." And I said, "What exactly are you afraid of?" And she said, "Well, I'm up in the air and I'm doing this, and I'm afraid I'm going to fall and I'm going to break my neck." And I said, "Why are you afraid now? Like, you were up there all that day. Gravity didn't suddenly arrive the day that you fell." And she said, "Because I never thought about it. Because you train the skill, you master it. The margin of error is so small, you act like it's not even there. You have a wide receiver who's coming over the middle. Someone is going to take out your ribs." I mean, you cannot let that fear stop you from doing what you need to do. So if you want to perform at the high levels, you have to be able to regulate your emotions. And that's one of the reasons why anger is such a problem. We tell athletes to ignore their emotions, and then they have emotions, and then they don't know how to manage their emotions. So now you see how it gets kind of screwy. But if we talk about people that perform at the highest levels, they have to have the ability to shut certain things out. Now, for some folks, like these CEOs that are, somewhat psychopathic, or even some of these athletes that are serial rapists, because we've had some of those, what's the problem? I just took what I wanted. What's the issue? And then there are other people that do things and they're like, "Oh my God, what did I do?" And sometimes it's alcohol and drugs that contribute to their being disinhibited. But I look, we have this fantasy that people are more moral than they are. All of us. Look, you could ask my wife, did you ever think Mitch deserved to be smacked? Yup. I mean, you can't be in a relationship and never think that person is really freaking annoying, right? Most people don't have domestic violence because as they're having that thought or that emotion, something kicks in and says, yeah, he probably deserved to be smacked, but it's not worth it. I don't want to ruin what I had, right? The moral compass comes in. Um, how many people do you think follow the speed limit? How many people buy fireworks on July 4th? How many people, jaywalk? And I'm not trying to say that murder and jaywalking are the same thing. What I'm saying is people are selective in their morality. And let's not think for a second that legality equals morality. There are things that are legal that are immoral, and there are things that are moral that are illegal. George Carlin once joked about prostitution. He goes, why is prostitution illegal? Certainly giving someone an orgasm is not the worst thing that someone could do in life. You can give someone an orgasm and you can sell shit, but you can't sell orgasms. That's illegal. Right. Okay, whatever. Sometimes I just scratch my head and go, I don't know. You didn't know we were going to be talking about prostitution, orgasms, and George Carlin today, did you?
I was gonna say George Carlin. What a great reference. I listened to him with my barber, so
He's my favorite philosopher, right?
he's a good. But some of the best philosophers are comedians, which I always find it is super fascinating that comedians have such a grasp on human nature and behavior.
Well, because they watch, right? They're observers.
Should we be judged by our worst thoughts?
I hope not. I hope not.
What's the
I hope
difference
not for you. I
between
hope not
thoughts
for
and
you.
action? What do you
What's that?
think?
I hope not for you.
What is the difference between thoughts and actions? Like, where does it get separated?
Okay, so let's also bifurcate it and understand that we have to decide that we're going to talk about this psychologically, not religiously, because some religions believe if you think it, you did it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge problem. What comes to mind is suicide. Almost everybody over the course of their life at some point is going to consider suicide to various degrees. Sometimes it's, you're a teenager and you're, rebelling against everything and I don't know what the fucking purpose is. Or life just feels so horrible, I don't know if I can go on. That doesn't mean you're going to commit suicide, right? And in fact, our unwillingness to talk about suicidal thoughts increases the risk of suicide because then the person ruminates about it. Nobody wants to talk to them about it. And then they progress potentially towards planning an action. Instead of, we could talk. Look, I'm also prejudiced. I'm a psychologist. I think we should be able to talk about anything. I think it's much better when we talk about our thoughts. In fact, talking about our thoughts and our feelings makes it less likely for them to go from thoughts and feelings to behavior without there being an opportunity for us to check it. Right? It's like if a man says, something, I feel like my sex life with my wife is unsatisfying. Sometimes I fantasize about having sex with another woman. We're going to go, no, that's ridiculous. What are you talking about? Instead of going, all right, I can appreciate why you might feel that way. What are you going to do about that? What are you going to do with your feelings? Have you spoken to your wife about it? Have you considered going to counseling? Or is the answer, no, don't say it out loud until the urge is too much and then you go to a prostitute and ruin your marriage, right? Or have an affair or whatever. I think that there's a big distance between thoughts and emotions and behavior, but it depends on the person and the circumstances. I believe that in order for therapy to work, you can't do it without starting with self-awareness. And we don't encourage people to do that enough. And the evidence of that is when you say something. Have you ever had one of these? You say something out loud, and before you even finish saying it, you're like, oh, I shouldn't have said that out loud. And then someone immediately judges you, and you go, yup, definitely shouldn't have said that out loud, and I'm never fucking saying that again. Right?
Just happened to me the other day.
Instead of going, wow, it's like when someone's a racist or they say something that's racist, they throw out a racial epithet when they're drunk and they go, oh, it was the booze. No, no. Alcohol doesn't make you say racist things. Alcohol, the part of your brain that would normally tell you that's a bad idea, that part of your brain was drinking too. So that part of your brain said, all right, I'm at the bar. I'm not going to stop you from saying what was already there. I think that the more we encourage people to be honest with themselves about what they think, what they feel, what they want, they're in a better chance to be masters of their own domain. They're in a better position to understand what motivates them, what they want, where they want to go. And then they're more decisive in how they strategize, formulate a plan, and bring it into reality. When we're not allowed to do that, I think, not to mention the fact that there's some people that are very impulsive to begin with. Like they go thoughts, emotions. Well, actually, no, it's behavior. What was the thoughts and the emotions that were connected to it, right? But I think that taking impulsivity out of the equation, the more we're able to get people to be intentional about what they're trying to do, the more they're masters of their own domain. I was talking to someone the other day in therapy, and they were like, well, you know, I don't want to be depressed. And I said, okay, well, depression is about how you feel. What would it look like in your life if you were not that way? He goes, I don't know. I said, well, what would your relationships be like? What would you be doing? Where would you be? And he goes, well, are you telling me that if I just do that, I won't be depressed? I said, not necessarily. But if you can't imagine it, you can't make it happen. It's the reason why imagery and visualization is used in sports so often. You can't complain about not winning the lottery if you don't buy a ticket, right? What are you willing to do to be a participant in what's going on in your life in order to make it better? And I think that deviant thoughts, just as I was talking about suicide before, deviant thoughts enter everybody's mind. Everybody. Anyone who says no, then those are the ones you got even more concerned about. And the more we're able to talk about that in safe spaces, and understand where it comes from, and sometimes you're not going to be able to understand it unless you're working with a psychologist and getting into therapy and unlayering this, and that can be scary and terrifying. But I think there's also a lot of people that know I'm going to do something bad. I just don't know when. And it doesn't have to be illegal, but they can feel the inclinations coming. And because they're not able to talk about it, they struggle with finding ways to prevent it from going down a bad path.
What is the healthy balance between talking about our feelings and emotions and, like the high performing athlete, being able to shut those emotions off and ignore them to be able to go do something to perform?
Trust. Trust is the issue. Knowing where you can talk. It's actually one of the worst kept secrets about sports psychologists. There are a lot of sports psychologists that are not psychologists. They're sports science kinesiology people. If you need them to help you with performance, they might be better than me. You need to talk about sexual abuse that happened to you as a child. They're not the person. So it comes down to trust and who you can talk to. And where is it safe to talk about those things? Because I do believe sports psychology is both of those things. When you have someone who has symptoms that interfere with performance, those symptoms are here, right? They're this is what normal performance would be. They're here because of the symptoms of what they're dealing with in life. But let's say they're here and they have obstacles. Well, those obstacles are stopping them from getting here. So to me, it doesn't matter. We're removing obstacles, whether it's from the symptoms that get us up to functioning normal, or here, removing the things to get where we need to go. And I would argue that the more we're in this space, the more you're going to want to have trust that you're talking to someone who's trained in how to do this. Now, as you also know, Colin, there are some things that you might talk to your wife about. And there are some things you're definitely not going to talk to your wife about. There's some things you might have a particular buddy like, Like my best friend, I know that there are certain things I can go. If there's a problem, he will be there and the problem will be solved. Not necessarily in the way that I want it to be, but it will be solved. And there are certain things that he's not the right guy to talk to about. And that's fine. But I think that the answer boils down to trust. Having someone or people that you can talk to about your deepest, darkest secrets. Because after all, you don't even think about talking about them until you've already realized that they're interfering with you somehow. And they're not just going to magically go away. People can't outrun their demons. They can't. They catch it from behind. And I'm much more about attacking those issues, trying to understand what's going on and mastering them. But people sometimes see it other ways. I'll just ignore it, or I'll drink it away, or I'll engage in bad behavior, or I'll distract myself. It takes courage. It takes courage.
Do we all have breaking points? Like the movie Law Abiding Citizen, his wife and daughter are killed, and I believe, I haven't seen it in a while, raped in front of him, and then he then goes and becomes a mass killer. Do we all have those breaking points?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. You hurt my family. I'm not a psychologist anymore. There aren't a lot of. I think that people that are more intact and more in tune, their buttons are well hidden. They're not easily provoked. It's one of the things I preach with all of the people, especially athletes I work with on anger management, that if people can push your buttons, they can control you. And strength is powers when you're unprovocable. But I think we all have a breaking point. And the more we're aware of that, the better we are to protect ourselves from getting there. Now, what it looks like when someone gets to their breaking point might have some individual differences as well. It might be, I've often said, and people have given me a lot of a side eye. If Mother Teresa was at the DMV, you'd see a pissed off mother there, right? And they're like, come on, you shouldn't say that about Mother Teresa. So when Mother Teresa gets to her breaking point, she might go, damn it. She's probably not going to get an AK-47 and engage in mass murder. So I think we all have breaking points, but even at people's breaking points, what behavior they may consider, consciously and unconsciously, is different depending on the person. But we should also be mindful that that might explain their behavior, but it's not going to excuse it. The example that I say unfortunately, like when I was going to talk about a guy I was working with who's actually, his daughter is an athlete and she was raped. And I said, I was going to say, unfortunately, I was working with this guy. No, I was fortunate to be working with this guy because I think he did amazing work under a tremendously stressful time. And he was like, Doc, I don't know if it was God's intervention or what. I don't know how I'm here with you right now and not in prison. And I said, I don't know how either. And I spent the first couple of sessions really just validating and listening. And one of the cool things in therapy is when the person that you're working with says what you're thinking. Like, you think you have this pearl of wisdom, and they get it before you say it, right? And he said, I'm going to get chills as I'm thinking about this because it was so profound. He said, the only thing that I can think of is if I did what I wanted to do to that guy, where would I be and who'd be taking care of my daughter? And I was like, yeah, that's exactly right. No matter what you did to him, and I might have enjoyed being a part of that, nothing would undo what he already did to your daughter. And your daughter was in bad shape, and thankfully she's getting better. and this is going to always be a part of her life. It's it's going to be a scar. The hope is that it's a scar, not a scab. A scab is when you scratch, you bleed. This will be a scar in her life, but she's getting better, and a lot of that has to do with the support that she's gotten from you and your wife. And she's very, very lucky in the situation that she was in. You guys have made it as healable of a journey as possible. And if her father was in prison for what you wanted to do to that young man, which I understand why you felt that way, she would have been at a great disadvantage, and she would have lost one of her greatest allies being in her corner. And then he goes, yeah, but what if I never got caught? And I said, oh man, we were almost there. We were almost there. But he got it. And he was able to see that the real honor in this situation, which is, you try to make, make lemonade out of lemons, was that what was most important was he was there for his daughter. And that's powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. And we don't always know the consequences of our actions. So we try to do the best we can and not make decisions while we're too emotional. It's one of the reasons why when I'm teaching kids, or actually athletes through the pro level, I use did I ever tell you about the 5-minute Yo Mama rule on social media? So the 5-minute Yo Mama rule, because we know mothers are more influential than fathers, right? No matter what comes at you, whether it's a tweet or a text or an email or whatever, I don't care what it is, you're not allowed to respond for 5 minutes when it's provocative, because that gives you an opportunity for the emotions to settle a little bit and not make a stupid decision, right? I said, but the wrinkle is then you can write what you're going to write, but you can't send it until you determine whether or not it would pass your mama's approval. And if she would be okay with it, then have at it. And if not, just delete it and let it go. Even a fish couldn't get in trouble if it kept its mouth shut. So sometimes the best thing we could do is resist the impulse.
Yeah, having 2 young daughters, this is a particular, special conversation for me to have, because I'm so unbelievably protective of my girls, and just want to protect them from all the world's dangers. And I know at some point, I have to let go and let them. Now, they're young, they're 3 and 7 months, so I got some time. But at some point, I know that day is going to come where I have to let them go out into the world, and knowing all the dangers and crazy out there, and just try to educate them and do my best. But it's hard conversations to have, like you said, but I want to make sure that there's a platform out there that will have these conversations.
It's a very vulnerable feeling, Colin. Anybody who has children, it is it's terrifying. It's terrifying. And especially as men, because we not only are we taught to, we expect to be protectors. The truth is, you can't protect your children from the world. You can't. You could do everything right and bad things can happen. You could do nothing right and good things will happen. But I do think there are a couple of things we can do, especially for our daughters, that'll make them less likely to be victimized. And in no way is it foolproof. But them having a good, solid sense of who they are and confidence, and knowing that when shit goes down, people got their back, and they have a voice and they will be heard, even when they tell you things you don't want to hear. Wait until the boyfriend conversation comes along, right?
I'm not. That's not.
I
I'm
know
not ready for that one, man.
that
That
needs medication, right? And if you don't know, the more you try to control who she dates, the more she's going to be drawn to the person you don't. I think that we teach people how we want to be treated, and I think that Um, it should be a reminder to men how they treat their wives, especially in front of their daughters, because their daughters see and hear everything anyway. You're teaching your daughters how they should expect a man to treat them when they are a wife. Um, and it's not about being perfect, because you won't be. None of us are. Um, being protective, but also being emotionally available and sensitive. And there's a time to be stoic and thoughtful. And I mean, one of the things that struck me about you from the very beginning was that you were curious and willing to be honest about the things that make you tick. That willingness to take a look at yourself gives you the best position to be the best dad you can be. A lot of men don't have the courage to do that. And by the way, when I say the best dad you could be, you're still going to fuck it up sometimes because you're human. We all do. Um, but I want for your daughters, for my daughters, for men that are listening to this, you want to create an environment where when shit goes down, they're coming to look for you. They're coming to talk to you. And I'm just not just talking about that guy was mean. Can you go kill him? No. When they're crying and they want to put their heads on someone's shoulders, hey, it's great that they could talk to mom, right? And there are going to be some things that they're going to prefer to talk to mom than dad about. Wait till puberty comes along and, they're going to ask you to go to the store to get something. That's going to be real comfortable for you. But I think the best dads are the ones that are available to hear whatever it is their kids have to say. And that security, that they know that people are in their corner. To me, it's no different than the dog in the house. The burglar's going to move to the next house. They see a confident kid, that's not the one they're going to try. So the more that the child feels safe in their environment and accepted for who they are, it's certainly not foolproof, but it puts them in a much better position. And yeah, daughters are wonderful. Sons are great too. I think the last secret I would say about this is that we like to believe that we're so vulnerable for the safety of our daughters. We have a lot of vulnerability about the safety of our sons too. You don't want your son to do something that's going to ruin their life. You don't want your son to do something in an emotional moment that might hurt someone else. Parenting is hard. No one made you or your wife take a test before you had those children, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the truth.
yeah. And those cute little buggers, they come out and you think, wait, I got the instruction manual for the wrong model. What happened here, right? And so you do the best you can and you learn as you go. But the more men and dads think about what they do and why they do it, and don't just preach it, but carry themselves that way, um, the better you can do to protect your kids in the future and prepare them for facing the world. Because after all, you don't want them living with you when they're 40.
I joke, I say my daughter's gonna be a real life Rapunzel. I'm gonna lock her in the tower, keep all the boys away. And yet somehow the boy still finds her, so and it's the bad boy, of course. But
Well, but all the more reason that you want her role model for what a man should be to be you, not that. Unless, of course, you have some of your bad boy days and you're past that. Hope mom doesn't tell all those stories.
hey, I'm pretty honest. I of course everybody's got their vices. Mine, of course, comes from the anger side. But I always treat my wife with respect, and I always say like what I'll ask my daughters, and I don't know if it'll work, but I always say if a boy is treating you like that, would you be okay with me treating your mom that way? And that's what I've always told myself I'll say to them. And I've always tried to live that way with my wife. Of course, I've failed and said things I shouldn't say and tough and try and learn. But I've always tried to be that respectful young man that everybody would want their daughter to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, look, if you also want to talk about protection honestly, the person that the young man is going to be more afraid of is not not the dad that's angry and bubbling over. It's the confident, quiet dad that says, "We're not going to do anything that I would be disappointed by, are we?" I mean, when you think about it in like the college scene, two kids get in a fight and say, "I'm going to fucking kill you." That's not the person you're worried about. That's not the person. The person you're worried about is, "Oh yeah, all right, I'll get you."
Have
And
you ever
my-
watched? We can talk about this quickly. Have you ever watched the one interview between John Jones and Daniel Cormier?
no, but
So
but I could only imagine how that went.
it was so to your point though. So I forget what they were arguing about, and John Jones, in the most calm voice ever, goes like, "Daniel, I will kill you." Like he's like, "I will kill you." And Daniel Cormier is a strong fighting champion as well. But he's
Right.
the one going off the rails, yelling and whatever. And John Jones is just like, "I would kill you." So to your point, it's a calm, cool, collected guy that's like, "I will kill you."
Well, look, the toughest guy in prison doesn't have to fight. I
Yeah.
mean, it's the guy, the rah rah guy is not the one who worries. The one you should be worried about is the quiet one who's watching.
Well, hey, I can't thank you enough for coming on. Round two, I think might have topped the first one, and I enjoyed the first one. But if people want to get at you, they want to reach out to you, or if you have anything to promote, hit us with it.
Well, I mean, look, I tend to have opinions about a lot of things. I hope a lot of people, I hope people actually disagree with some of the things that I'm saying, because the way we move the needle is by arguing about stuff and talking about stuff respectfully, of course. Um, you can certainly get me at Twitter at Mitch Abrams ID. Um, I do a fair amount of presenting on this stuff with sexual assault prevention, assessment, and treatment for athletes that are involved in this. Um, you can email me. Anytime anyone wants to talk about this stuff, I am live and ready to go. I appreciate the opportunity, Colin. Not only do you're a thoughtful guy, but you also know where the conversation is going, and it really, um, there's so many different avenues we can pursue on these things. We kind of game planned on this a little bit just to not go too far astray. And I know when I watch this over, I'm going to be thinking, oh, we could have talked for 20 minutes about that or this. And what I would encourage, especially for men, because we don't do enough of this, is lean into this stuff thoughtfully, and think about what you bring to the table and how you were raised, whether it's related to sports or not, because we've had a lot of coaches out there that have been very influential and parents that have taught us a lot of great things. But like I said, it's not just one pocket of middle America where people are acting like idiots. We've all done some stupid things from time to time. And the more we're able to talk about these things, the more we could put things in place. And um, as a semi violent, angry athlete, maybe a little bit at some point in my past, I've learned to harness it and do great things with it. And I hope that you guys can do all that as well, because sports are a microcosm of our society. And just as we have a lot of things in our society are problematic, we're sometimes going to see that in sports too. But if we can understand it, we could do something about it. And, if you think about how the wide range that we talked about stuff today, I mean, we talked about Sandusky and child abuse and USA gymnastics. We're talking about fathering daughters and Title IX and everything in between. So I certainly appreciate the opportunity. I look forward to continuing to have conversations with you. We're going to wind up having to make this a 10-volume set or something.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Next round, well, maybe we'll open it up for a 3-hour conversation, and we'll get together in person. But so well said. Thank you so much. Listeners, thank you for tuning in, particularly a deep conversation like this. Make sure to download the podcast, subscribe to YouTube now. Our YouTube channel is up. 5 stars only, baby. Appreciate you guys. Thanks, guys.